More than ever today, the era of the smartphone is starting to set a little bit. If anything, I feel like people more than ever are really looking for ways to use their phones less. People find so exciting about a smartwatch or a pair of smart glasses is that you kind of get just the good, right? You get access to these new age internet assistants like Gemini. You get access to maps. You get access to taking photos and videos. You can keep in touch with people, but you can't scroll Instagram, right? You can't play games the same way. I think in 5 years, undoubtedly, smart glasses are going to become much, much more popular.
Is there any other limitations that you can think of when it comes to the current wearables?
I think the biggest limiting factor is really around foundational models. The smallest size of a model that I've really seen come out is in that 270 million parameter, 300 billion parameter. You need models that are smaller than that to be performant on leading smartwatches, even smaller than that for leading glasses. There's a real gap in that market. You have to be willing to accept that you will be the least intelligent person in that room when it comes to a topic. You can't let asking a stupid question keep you from learning.
Hello. What's happening, folks? Thanks a lot for tuning in to the Altered Perception Show. Today we have Austin Mejia with us. He is leading AI for Pixel Watch plus Wear OS at Google. He's definitely the cutting edge person that I know of in terms of the wearables, where the industry is going towards, and how AI and LLM is affecting the wearable industry. So I'm going to learn a lot. I hope that you also do. I want to start, Austin, first thing first. Thanks a lot for coming to the show.
Of course, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm super excited to be chatting today.
Yeah, likewise. I want to start with the preface that I saw you at the AI conference in San Francisco. That was an amazing panel discussion, and you nailed it with all the points that you shared about where the industry is going toward.
Thank you so much. It was a really phenomenal opportunity to get to be there, and I had some fantastic co-panelists. So it was a great experience for me as well, and I'm glad it was for you as well.
Yeah, without further ado, I think let's start with your introduction. Would you mind giving audience some background about yourself?
Absolutely. So my name is Austin, and I'm a product manager, and I lead AI for our wearables group here at Pixel. It's a team in 3 stages. So we do traditional software development, roadmap, vision, what do we want to build, actually build it, go to market. But we're also a bit of a research group. So we develop our own models, we do our own post training for certain work, and we also build our own infrastructure to better support our use cases. Lastly, we're a hardware group. So we look at that experience we want to build, and then we look at the models required to power it, and we try to better understand what does it really take to run those experiences, thermal performance, chipset, tokens per second, memory capabilities. It's really a full stack team, and it's been such a fantastic opportunity to have been there for the past 2-3 years now, leading that work on the product side.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a pretty interesting journey I think you're having. I want to kind of touch first thing first on how did you get into this title and position?
Yeah, so I came into hardware completely by accident. My background is in computer science and public policy. So I had been doing a lot of work in that US tech infrastructure perspective and what the future of technology going forward would be. I actually got my master's degree at a university in China that was for global relations. And so I thought from a very macro view. And I came to Google through their rotational product management program, early career program, and I randomly got placed on the hardware team. I had no prior hardware experience. People always ask me with my current role, did I do something in electrical or hardware engineering? And I was about as far away from that as you realistically could be while also getting a computer science degree. But I quickly fell in love with the space. I love how hardware is just such a deeply emotional, personal type of product compared to the traditional software stuff that we otherwise build at Google. And I was originally on the phone team there, helping build and lead AI experiences. So when it came time for me to leave the phone team, I came over to Watch. And I quickly realized that no one was focusing on building and delivering AI experiences on Watch. It was just a blind spot. And so I actually ended up trying to pitch and build that team. I made decks, I sent them around, I created this big vision about how we could go achieve AI on the Watch and what it would look like. And ultimately, it culminated in this conversation I had with my manager at the time and the director, the overall product lead for the entire watch business, where I walked them through what I thought we should do, and they gave me the green light. So I actually got to start that team my second year at Google and build it from the ground up. So we're now a team of, I think, more than 30, 35 people across engineering, design, product, legal, marketing. It's been such a unique and phenomenally rare opportunity to actually build something 0 to 1 at Google and learn so much about what it takes to actually take something to market, particularly in this really tumultuous period we're in right now with AI.
That's a crazy story. I'm like in awe, like how you started off with by accident, like running into hardware and like leading an AI, in the space where you didn't even have that much knowledge and experience, and like actually being an entrepreneur, right? There is a saying wherein
Mm.
you are either an entrepreneur or an entrepreneur. So seems like you were that entrepreneur and you found that niche opportunity to grasp, and you kind of took off from there.
Yeah. So I have actually, before Google, I'd worked mostly in startups. I'd worked at everything from this very small image based search startup in Tel Aviv called Set AI. I was director of engineering for this Gen Z consulting agency called Juve Consulting. And so I had already had a very deep entrepreneurial backbone to me. Both my parents are small business owners. And I had never been afraid to really chase and try doing something. And Google fortunately is a really fantastic environment for that, where if you can build a vision, you can sell the story, you can really get people excited. Someone like me who, did not have a prior background, but was just so passionate and had such deep conviction, can learn, can become an expert and sell that story, make that team actually do something net new. I'm glad you called that out. It's a really interesting narrative for me as well.
Yeah, no, that does set the tone of how we continue the conversation, because I'm super curious now. And if we can kind of zoom in a little bit more on the entrepreneur journey, or the startups that you have worked in, what lessons have you learned from there that you have applied into your current role and like leading a team at Google?
I think the biggest thing I learned at the end of the day is that if you're on a really good team, they're hiring you because you're smart and because you have a unique point of view. And so a lot of people talk about this idea of being permissionless and doing something without needing to get that express consent. And I think what they misunderstand about it is this idea of I can do something and, I shouldn't have to listen to anyone. I think the real perspective is if you can see something that no one else is seeing, only you is going to be able to chase down, drive, try to do and achieve that. And you shouldn't seek permission for the things that you know to be true,
Hmm.
especially if you have a reason for believing other people don't know them to be true yet. And so that's the single biggest lesson I've taken, where a lot of the projects and a lot of things that we've built were not things that, my leadership told me, hey, this is an important priority, let's invest in it. There are things I sought out and I advocated and built from the ground up because I believe there are fundamental problems with fundamental solutions. And that is a lot harder to do, to get people to buy in versus just getting a mandate. But the flip side is you really get to innovate and you get to own that front to back because it was always your idea and it was always your solution and product from the start.
Yeah, there's something special about starting from scratch, and I'm a big proponent of that. That helps you. Basically, you can kind of use your imagination to the fullest and envision things which are not executed yet. I do want to ask you, when was this when you actually pitched in your deck and start working on the hardware side and the wearable side?
Yeah, so I joined Pixel Watch around fall 2023. And I was originally brought on to do some hardware, some software, some charging work. But I quickly realized that this AI stuff needed to be the focus and something we should be driving on. And so I started making some of those early decks and those early pitches probably around September, October. And then just over the course of a month or two, in addition to the core work I was already assigned, was ramping up, trying to build momentum, build more force and energy. And all of a sudden, I remember one day people were sharing my documents without me sending it first. I was getting all these requests on Google Drive to share this doc with this person or give comment permission to that person. And I think that's when I realized that it was suddenly taking off. That was around October. And that built up to this conversation we had December 2023, just before the holiday season, where we sat down and realized this needs to be the focus.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And so, since you have been in this, leading AI and for Wear OS and Pixel Watch, what is the biggest change you have seen so far from December 23 to now, where the industry is going towards?
You know, when I started the team, there was this feeling that wearables were very much peripheral accessories, right? Like, great to build a smartwatch, great to build glasses, great to build headphones, but really they all support the phone. And more than ever today, there's a real feeling that the era of the smartphone is starting to set a little bit, right? And I think we all kind of feel it. Smartphones just aren't innovating year over year as much as they were just like 2, 3 years ago, even, right? It's a lot harder to say what is new about the phone, what's actually driving demand and interest, like what are the new experiences being unlocked here. And in some ways, they're becoming really stagnant, where like you can't do a major redesign of how you navigate your phone because it's the phone. Everyone knows what a smartphone is supposed to look like. You can't just play around with something that's so established and set in stone. If anything, I feel like people more than ever are really looking for ways to use their phones less, right? We see all these apps and all these products trying to limit screen time that are purposely built to use, ink displays or alternate interaction schemes that are supposed to limit your use. I think there's a real sense that everyone kind of knows that phones aren't going to be any more popular than they are today. Maybe people continue to go up to higher price point phones and there's more premium market. But I don't think we really think someone who hasn't been convinced of about a smartphone before is going to suddenly start using one. If anything, I think more people are going to try making the choice to not use a smartphone if they already have one. And by contrast, wearables really feel like that next step. And you see so many products and markets speak to that. The Plaud Note is a really great startup, completely bootstrapped, and they've hit 1 million units without raising a single cent of VC funding. They've grown 10x in terms of their volume of sales year over year for the past 2 years.
And what
Meta
do
Ray
they
Bans is another.
what do they
Oh,
do
yes,
again?
please. I actually have it here. It's an AI note taker. It sits on the back of your phone. Sits on the back of your phone with like a magnetic attachment, and it listens and records and transcribes your meeting notes. It's a very powerful but simple and to the point tool, and it's been really incredibly successful in the market. Another example is the Meta Ray Bans. That device has been growing like crazy for Facebook. I think they're 4xing their projected growth for Q2 2025 compared to the same time last year, and it's only growing in scale and momentum. So I think there's a real feeling that there's another device that's on the horizon, and AI is going to be the real key to unlocking that next device, that next set of experiences that wasn't really on the table before.
That's very interesting. I want to share one quick data on what you just said. You
Mm.
mentioned that the smartwatch use is decreasing, and that's
The
literally
smartphone use is
oh
decreasing.
yeah, smartphone use is decreasing, and there's like a really good statistics that actually came about like recently, which says that if you kind of project it out from the last 5 years to how people have been using their smartphone and their daily usage, it became like peak in 2022, and then from there it's
Mhm.
constantly decreasing, and the biggest downgrade is in terms of like the young generation. The young generation are realizing that spending more time on smartphone is kind of deteriorating their health,
Mhm.
even like the neck problems, like physiological problems to psychological
Yeah.
problems. There's like the problems are endless. So It's
Yeah.
interesting that we are kind of gradually shifting towards it, whether people realize it or not.
Yeah. And I think more than ever, that tension of, hey, I don't want to have everything that's addicting about my phone, but I still want messaging and calling and internet and maps, right? That was a really hard choice that you kind of had to take the good with the bad. And I think what people find so exciting about a smartwatch or a pair of smart glasses is that you kind of get just the good, right? You get access to these new age internet assistants like Gemini. You get access to maps. You get access to taking photos and videos. You can keep in touch with people, but you can't scroll Instagram, right? You can't play games the same way. It's a lot more, it kind of takes away the need to exert self-control, and it's a constraint device. But I think that constraint for a lot of people is what makes it appealing.
That's pretty fascinating. And you mentioned a couple of use cases of wearables. You said the AI or yeah, AR slash AI glasses, and then you have
Yeah.
the smartwatches, and then you have
Mhm.
you showed about the AI note taker. So are they all like, or are the wearable industry in terms of like very niche driven? Like you will have all of these devices working together, or do you foresee like
Yeah.
where everything combining into kind of like one platform, so to say?
That is such an excellent question. And the truth is, nobody knows. It is unclear if something like, for example, the smartwatch is going to be the only form factor for forever, or the glasses are going to be the only form factor and it's going to be a convergence, or will those form factors naturally continue to be bifurcated because they can't do the same thing as each other? Um, I think a good example is that a watch will realistically never have photo and video capabilities, right? It's never going to be able to take a photo. It's never going to be able to film a video. That's not really the experience. Similarly, a pair of glasses is never going to really be that good for health and fitness tracking, right? Even if you built the sensors into it, you can't easily secure glasses to your face in such a way that it's going to be able to track movement and complex options and sleep. You don't sleep with your glasses on. And so there's always going to be use cases that are unique and differentiated between the two. I think what's really interesting is that will there be one device that emerges to be superior in the common use cases between the two? Or will it largely come down to style? Where, for example, I think some people will always love to use a tablet and use a tablet and attach a keyboard for their primary work. And some people will use a laptop and always use that for their primary work. At a certain point, the tablet with the keyboard and the laptop aren't converging anymore, right? They're distinct products, and that's because the users of those products, even though they do very similar tasks, end up having different priorities in terms of what they want to index more in versus what they're willing to make more compromises on.
Okay, so on that, I have a follow-up question. Now,
Yeah.
you know that Google is working on Pixel and Pixel like watches at the same time Google AI glasses or AR glasses. Now, Meta is also
Mhm.
working on their own Ray-Ban plus their own wrist system. So, do you still think that there's going to be individual use cases for these devices, but it's going to be owned by few top companies, or there's going to be
Yeah.
diversification there?
So I do think that certain, I think both. I think there are some experiences that right now do require a lot of unique capital investment to do the research and development on. For example, with Meta and what they're building with these Orion glasses, that wristband that looks at ECG signals or EKG signals, that is something that a startup realistically could never pursue without immense amounts of funding. Because the amount of foundational research required to even make progress on that gesture and motion tracking, I think is just infeasible. It's the same reason that, only a select number of companies will ever build AI chips because the amount of work and infrastructure and scale you need to achieve it is just so high. On the flip side, though, we have seen consistently that there are many startups able to enter the AI hardware space and be incredibly, incredibly successful. Again, the Plaud Note Taker pin is a really good example. I'm trying to pull it off my phone right now. This thing is able to sell and grow and scale, and people love, love, love this device. and it didn't raise a cent of funding. It's been bootstrapped since the very beginning. There's no VC investment. It's entirely owned by the founders and other people associated with the company. And that is entirely a startup. And so we're seeing very prominent examples of both. I have no doubt that there will be some convergence, especially as more tech companies throw their hat into the ring. But I think right now it's still very much a Wild West where any company could build a hit AI wearable device that really just understands the market and the segment and their use case and completely delivers on it.
Yeah, so that's a really good point. And one thing I've been wondering is like you have the smartwatches, then you have the AR glasses, and then you have the note taker.
Mhm.
Apart from that, do you have any other products that you are seeing that's kind of like picking up in the recent years, or will be picking up?
Yeah, part of what's really exciting about hardware right now is that there's all these new form factors that are being unlocked because these chips and SoCs are finally becoming small enough to enable them. There's this principle called Moore's Law. I won't bore you with it, but the basic premise is that every 2 years, chips become twice as efficient in terms of their compute and processing. So, therefore, a chip that's half the size could be equal in power to something double its current size if you give it another 2 years. And so what that really has enabled lately is a whole new set of form factors that weren't available in wearables before, right? The watch was the only thing available for so long because it's reasonably large and it's big enough such that you can fit a meteor chip in there. But now we have smart glasses, we have smart rings, we have necklaces, we have pendants, we have all these really unique form factors that just weren't physically possible before but are now for the very first time. I won't count anything out at this point because I think what I know to be true about wearables is that it's the form factor before it's anything else, right? Pixel Watch is a potential contender for like the future leader of AI in this space. First and foremost, because it looks like a really good watch. Like it looks like something you could wear. People all the time come up to me and tell me, hey, like, I didn't even know that was a smartwatch until you pointed it out. I think, speaking to Google's past failures, I think Google Glass just didn't happen because it obviously didn't look like a pair of glasses. Whereas I think Meta Ray-Bans are doing great, primarily because they're Ray-Bans before they're smart glasses, right? They look like the form factor. And so as we start to have access to more types of wearables because of the physical progression, it's really going to be powerful to see like what emerges in the market and what is something that people are really resonating with that we just weren't able to build before.
Yeah, I mean, such a great point about the form factor. Like, if you think about it, we humans don't like to use a product just for the sake of using it. It has to have some
Mhm.
sort of interest or relevance to us, and it should be personable. So we should be
Yeah,
associating ourselves with it. And so you cannot, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, accessories and wearables have existed in our society for centuries, millennia. Earrings, necklaces, rings, watches, like these have been around for so long. And it's kind of a double edged sword where, on one hand, because they're so commonplace, it's very natural to introduce a new device or a new type of device that mimics it because, there's no social stigma to overcome. We already know that someone can wear a necklace or wear a pair of earrings or wear a ring. The flip side, though, is because they have an established form factor, detracting too strongly from it is also disruptive. You can't make something in the wearable space that doesn't look like the wearable or the existing accessory it's trying to imitate, because too much of a divergence creates that like barrier in terms of being able to be more ambient and connected and socially embedded. I was a big I actually tested the Humane pin. I have it here on my desk. Actually, I was like one of like the thousands of people that actually got to try this thing.
Oh,
And
cool,
the
cool.
single biggest issue I found was that it really got in the way of social interaction more than it helped. It doesn't look like anything that exists today. And so wearing it on
Mm.
my shirt, I just found myself having more friction talking to people, interacting with people, actually connecting with people than this ambient, oh wow, it's so natural. It's like there isn't anything there. Because I think it looks so off putting. I don't get that reaction with the watch. I don't get that reaction with an Aura ring. And that's because, and I don't get that reaction with the Meta Ray Bans. And it's because they look like they look like things we already know to accept in our daily lives.
Yeah, I think I can totally relate to it. And, kind of goes back to the same point you said. I mean, this can, like your watch can attach to yourself, right? Your glasses can attach to you, so you don't have to worry about it. Same goes with your AirPods, right?
Mm-hmm.
After a while, you don't even realize that it's part of you. It becomes you,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Yeah.
there's definitely beauty in that. And I love that you said that, you have these watches like Pixel watches, for example, looks really cool too. Not just like it is a smartwatch. To my
Yeah.
next question to you is like, do you think that these brands like LV or like these luxury brands will get into making these products because why
Yeah.
not?
There once was a world in early like 2010s where a lot of these luxury brands tried getting into smartwatches. This was in that era of everything was an app. They were digitizing for the first time. It felt like the next wave. And ultimately, a lot of these brands took a step back because I think the constraints and limitations of the hardware and what it had to look like to be designed in such a way just came too much into conflict. Like you couldn't build a really premium luxury looking watch without making so many compromises. And at a certain point, it just misaligned with the brand identity. And so the most popular example that's been able to exist so far is really Apple Watch's partnership with Hermes, right? You get brands, you get certain cases, like, and the watch band looks like the Hermes watch, but they won't release an Hermes watch itself hardware wise, in part because I just don't think it matches that brand identity and there's no major brands there. I think what's really interesting about the Meta Ray-Ban's partnership with Luxottica, which owns Ray-Ban in addition to many other brands, is that it's the first time where you're really seeing a major wearable have success that is being co-branded by another luxury like house. It's not like the Meta Ray-Ban case or like the Meta Ray-Ban frame or the Ray-Ban frame, but like the Meta glasses, it's the Meta Ray Bans, right? It's equally Meta's as much as it is Ray Ban's brand and identity. And I think we'll start to see much more of that in the future as these new form factors become a lot more viable. As an example that I'll speak to right now, I don't see any reason why something like Aura Ring, now that it's starting to get to a certain form factor, couldn't do a luxury partnership with a major jewelry brand, right? If you do certain stone inlays or if you use real gold or real metals or materials there to help polish it up, I think those form factors are finally viable and they can look like a luxury product in a way that I just don't think was possible a few years ago.
Oh, I think you mentioned Aura Ring. Is that the one that you kind of
Yes.
wear it and then it kind of you can record conversation?
It's not a recorder, it's a health and fitness tracker.
Ah, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that makes total sense. And then you also mentioned briefly before that now with the help of AI, you can unlock a lot more things in the
Mhm.
smart watches as well as the AR glasses and pretty much uh, holistically in the wearable industry. So, what are the benefits that are able to be unlocked because of AI, especially when it comes to like smartwatches and the work that you're doing?
Yeah. To me, the single biggest benefit is usability and interaction. In the current paradigm that exists today of like the touch screen and navigation, a smartphone could be pretty precise, right? It wasn't perfect, but you can tap on certain characters the right way. You can, usually pretty accurately tap on buttons, go to next screens. It turns out the touchscreen works really well for a screen of that size. The touchscreen doesn't work very well on a smartwatch, right? That's just too little. There's not enough space. It's too hard to be precise, especially with something like a keyboard. And so your ability to navigate and use the watch was really limited because there was just such little screen real estate. And there wasn't a good way to get around it because voice is effective but requires you to be obscenely precise. And there weren't good ways of mapping intention based off of commands. Language is a very flexible um, medium of input and communication, and there it's really hard to be precise and be flexible to that. I think what AI does really uniquely is that it it helps fold in context, and it's able to handle imprecision pretty gracefully, right? So I think a good example is, let's say you want to like log your macros for like a snack you might be eating. If you were to try, actually, let me take a step back there. Let's say your kid is sick and you need to reschedule your appointments. Um, Today, there really isn't a good way to achieve or do that on a smartwatch. There isn't a really good way to check your calendar and send an email to someone and let them know, hey, my kid's sick, and reschedule to a new time. You have to, your calendar can't dynamically understand what you mean by, say, reschedule. It doesn't understand like what your preferences could be, or what you would want to do and achieve with that. The great thing with LLMs and language models is the interpretability and the flexibility. You can tell an LLM, hey, like I'm sick, I need you to reschedule all my afternoon appointments. And it can reasonably handle that task, right? With the right connectivity and the APIs between apps. It could send emails to every person that you have on that calendar and say, sorry, my kid is sick, I'm going to reschedule. It can look at your calendar and find alternative times and propose them and move them and put a D&D block for the rest of your day, right? It could not only do those actions the way you would anticipate them, but even come to its own conclusion about next logical steps. And you don't necessarily need to hard code all of that. A model can learn to do that because it has a semantic understanding of language. And I think that's what LLM is so powerful for a smartwatch. It removes the need to explicitly navigate to interpretive, contextual, flexible navigation and user interfaces.
Yeah, so I think to your example, my next question is, how do you even like fit in the LLM or like an AI inside like of a smartwatch? Is it like some
Yeah.
other device it's plugged into, or is it in the cloud, or how does it even work?
Yeah. So for really big examples and tasks like that, we would want to leverage something like the cloud. And when we talk about AI and on device AI, I think there's a misconception about implying that, hey, it's either entirely in the cloud or it's entirely on the watch or entirely on the glasses, and there's no in between. I think the right perspective is to say, hey, there is a small subset of tasks that are critical to be done on device for a variety of factors. And for those experiences, we will make sure we build on device models and infrastructure that power them.
Can you give
For
some
everything
examples?
else, exactly. So there's three big reasons we talk about needing to have something on device: privacy, latency, and availability. Privacy is a really great example because we just built an experience with this. There are certain expectations about sensitivity and privacy and security with certain user information. For example, if you were to get a text message from someone and you wanted to generate an AI response to that, you can't just do that in the cloud. Almost every major messaging platform, from Android Messages, which is a Google product, to WhatsApp, expects that any processing or inference done on that message has to be done on device. It can't be sent somewhere else. And so there is no cloud compute for that use case. You have to leverage something available to the device it's received on. And we actually built that experience. In 25, we announced it with the Pixel Watch 4, and it's now public. It's called Smart Replies, and it does exactly that: on device generative messaging. Um, and that's something where it could not be done in the cloud otherwise. There's a unique need for that experience.
That's pretty cool. And I was actually looking into your latest release on the Pixel Watch 4.
Mhm.
Pretty amazing upgrade. And you also actually mentioned on your post as well that you have the first ever on watch LLM, and then you have the race to talk and industry leading hardware. So
Yes.
can you actually expand on these use cases more?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for calling that out. We are so, so excited with how the Pixel Watch 4 is landing. It's really it's important not only for me personally because it's the first product I really worked on end to end at Google, but it's maybe our maybe one of our best received Pixel devices ever. That's definitely in our watch space. And a huge thing I'm proud of with that launch is that we did ship the first on-watch LLM ever. Um, it had never been done before, specifically for messaging. I should clarify. It had never been done before, and in part, that was because no one had tried to produce and develop a model that was serving a very specific use case quite the way we were. There were other um, companies that were trying to use language models to drive experiences on their watches, but they were all internet based or they were using architectures that weren't quite the full transformer conformer architecture that you think of with like a Gemini model or a ChatGPT. And we really believed that this was the future and that not only was this going to really create value for this feature, but it was going to lay the groundwork and compounding in terms of really creating an AI centric watch and all the on device experiences we believed would come with that.
And so, when it comes to like smartwatches, I know that you guys are pretty much nailing it in all the aspects of because
Yeah.
you guys have like really advanced features when it comes to smartwatches. But is there any other competition that you are looking for, and they are pretty much also doing really well and developing smartwatches with advanced techniques?
So I won't speak to any individual competitors. I think we know that the smartwatch market is, full of really interesting innovation and really I think we keep our eyes even bigger than that to not just smartwatches but really other forms of wearables, whether that's fitness trackers, AI note takers, other form factors like glasses or rings. Right now wearables is kind of a mushy category where there's so many things that can be that. And so we really try to take a step back and say, what are the experiences we want to build and really achieve on? And how do we create that best experience possible? Not just among smartwatches, but other devices in the space that try to do something similar.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. I mean, I think you did mention a couple of use cases, but if you were to kind of zoom in on either Pixel Watch or just like wearables in general, like what are like the top two feature that you are most proud of so far?
I think the experience I'm really proud of is the Smart Replies experience that we built. So as you've mentioned previously, and as we've talked about, it was a first of its kind experience. Up until that point, no one had shipped an on device LLM. And even internally, there was a lot of discussion and debate and turmoil. There were very senior engineers that I was partnering with who had said that an on watch LLM in the 25 timeframe was impossible, not feasible. You weren't going to get the performance you needed. It was something that could happen in 26 or 27, somewhere down the line, but definitely not this year. And in tandem with that, there was so many unknowns, right? We had never in Google brought an LLM onto a smartwatch. And so not only were there no examples externally that we could look at, but even internally, we could look at the phone, which had brought a language model, Gemini Nano, onto their devices a year or two prior. But no one within our ecosystem of watch and wear OS had really done it before. And so speaking to that conversation that we had earlier around, you know, being an entrepreneur, being 0 to 1, we had to figure out so much for ourselves in terms of inference pipelines, in terms of what was feasible, in terms of performance. How do we optimize the system in such a way that we could have on device inference of an LLM? What are the constraints? What are the considerations we have to make? We had to figure out things like validation and safety testing and making sure that the model was not going to output any endangering or hazardous messages, and that is all really hard work to do, not only the feature development, but to do the model and software development of fine tuning and developing that model to meet our standards and to figure out the hardware is those three pieces I talked about at the very start that our team does. But they're all very hard problems that I think at another company, it would be three separate organizations solving each of those pieces individually. So that's probably the second thing I'm most proud of. And the third thing I'm proud of is that it's a good feature. we have known for a while that messaging on smartwatches is not a good experience. If you've ever used a smartwatch yourself, you know sending a text from it is terrible. Voice to text is fine, but doesn't really do what you want to do. Sometimes it gives you emoji options, but those pre written messages that should be your go to just suck. And so we knew that at the end of the day, regardless of what happens, if someone else beat us to the market in terms of the LLM or not, whether or not we were going to, get to make that claim, all things aside, we knew there was an enduring user problem, and we were convinced that this new generation of technology was going to solve it in a way that previous solutions weren't able to. And that alone makes me very proud because we've seen the reception and the release online, and it seems like we've done that job, right? We have made the messaging experience on watches better, and we're going to continue to do so.
100%. I think I think you nailed it, and I was actually reading more into it, and people have been praising Pixel Watch left and right. I do wanted to ask you, when it comes to like dexterity, can the watch like map the dexterity and like the hand gestures, or is the voice agent or the vocal itself enough?
So today we don't track hand gestures and movement to, I think, the degree you're implying. We do have a feature Race to Talk, which tracks the user movement and is able to open Gemini automatically based off of that gesture. And we've been so happy with the reception there and how much it seems to transform that interactions paradigm. But a lot of what we do today, which was huge for us as well, was we finally brought Gemini as an agent and an assistant to the watch. And that alone has changed so much because Legacy Assistant just didn't have that flexibility and interpretability of language. So it's really that Race to Talk gesture in tandem with this completely improved technology that makes for something truly transformational and magical with what we've released so far.
Yeah. And then I think you briefly mentioned this few times, the hardware part. When you
Mhm.
mentioned like you guys have to kind of go through some of these limitations which were not at all existing out internally or externally. So what were
Yeah.
like when it comes to the chips, do you have to kind of like specifically design chips for the wearables when it, for example, for
Mhm.
the smartwatches or for any other wearables you're working on, or does it have to be like, or is it like a common thing wherein you can kind of use it pretty much with the common architecture?
So we on the watch do not build our own chipset. That is something that the phone has done for a while now, and they've been very successful. But we have some really great partners in Qualcomm, and we have, I think, a very strong collaboration. So in working with them, we tell them about our roadmap, what we think the future of our experiences and features will be, and what we think those requirements will fundamentally be in terms of tokens per second, thermal latency, um, performance, and encode decode speeds. And we really work with them collaboratively on that hardware component. Separately, though, we do a lot of lab testing and environment testing where we run our experiences or projected experiences on our hardware and we try to map thermal performance. We try to map jank. We try to map how much battery is being used per inference and where that battery is specifically being used. We try to build end-to-end pipelines to validate latency and what parts of the experience contribute to that latency. So part of the challenge is being able to articulate our needs in terms of our future investment and roadmap. The other part of the challenge is just understanding how exactly AI is performing on that device and the unique considerations that go into it and what can we do from an architecture experience or an architecture perspective, both on the hardware software side as well as the experience side to make meaningful compromises within that system. Watches are a very constrained form factor, and so um, when you're working with a tenth of the compute that a phone might have and a tenth of the system resources, you really have to be intelligent with it. You have to be very deliberate in a way that I think larger devices maybe don't have to be quite as precise because they're not as thin in terms of their bandwidth and performance.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Is there any other limitations that you can think of when it comes to the current wearables and the technology?
I think the biggest limiting factor is really around foundational models. So Most foundational models are the base, most essential element in building AI. If you look at a lab like Reality Lab, or not Reality Labs, the Llama and AI group at Meta, or Google DeepMind, or Grok, like all these AI labs produce foundational models. And from there, you can take those models and fine tune them or build on top of them or apply them to different use cases. But you need to have that model as a base. And most labs today don't produce models at the size that a wearable needs them. You know, the smallest size of a model that I've really seen come out from a major lab is in that 270 million parameter, 300 million parameter. But really, at least in terms of how I understand it, you need models that are smaller than that to be performant on leading smartwatches, even smaller than that for leading glasses. And there's a real gap in that market. In fact, when we started building smart replies, there just wasn't really any model that existed within Google that made sense for our use case, that was the right size and the right quality. We're seeing much more of that develop over time. But I think the single biggest bottleneck to development is that the foundational research isn't, in my opinion, focusing nearly enough on how important on device is in building cuts and sizes of models that are in that sub 500 million parameter range that are really going to be feasible for a device to run on it.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense, and that's why it's kind of, again, to your point, that you cannot have like the AI chip itself like being planted on the wearables, because then it's easier to have like a very constrained like only million parameters rather than having billions of
Yeah.
parameters, which you can kind of communicate the billions of parameter model, which can be either in the cloud or on your device or like on your smartphone
Yeah.
or something, and then it can communicate with the smartwatch.
Yeah, exactly. You know, when we started building smart replies, the smallest model that was really the smallest mainstream widely available model was really in that 2 billion parameter range, which is the model that we've shipped for smart replies is about less than a tenth of that size in terms of parameter count. Now we're starting to see a lot more shipped that are sub 500 million parameters, but that's still, you know, a factor of two or three off of where we need a lot of those models to be just for smartwatches. If you're talking about glasses, we need even smaller models because they have much more constraint in terms of their system capability and performance than a smartwatch.
Yeah. I think you mentioned briefly that the use cases of these wearables are endless. What I'm
Yeah.
personally excited about is the personal health, because
Mhm.
you have like smartwatches and even the AR glasses that can even track and monitor your health daily and even during sleep.
Mhm.
So that gives you a really good, realistic, and personalized data. And then the next step is the AI, right? Where you can plug in this data to this AI, and then the AI can kind of help you out throughout your goals. Whatever goals you have, health-wise or diet-wise, whatever, then it can kind of nudge along. Do you think that we are heading towards there, or do you think that we still have time?
So I think this is a problem that is very serious and I think more complicated than the traditional productivity experiences or creative experiences that were used with AI. And that's because health and fitness are so important to human condition. And it's very different to make a creative recommendation of, hey, maybe this is how you could write this poem, or this is how you could write this email. That's a completely different level of seriousness than, hey, I'm going to make a recommendation about your lifestyle or activity you should do, or hey, I think this condition could be XYZ, or this data could imply something. It's a much more serious bar. And really, there's some tasks that AI, in my opinion, shouldn't do without the having a physician or a trained professional as part of that experience. And so it's been slower to come to market because the real cost and risk to human health and safety is much more serious than image generation necessarily might be, or text generation might necessarily be. That said, Google is pursuing this, and we have a really great public preview of our new agentic health and fitness experience from Fitbit coming this month in October, which I'm assuming by the time this podcast goes live will be available as a public preview. And it's exactly that, trying to start to solve and build some really powerful experiences for agentic health and fitness. I say all of this not to say, hey, like, we're never going to do it, but to say that it's actually a distinct type of problem that, well, I'm also really invested in it too. I think we want to make sure we really do it right on the first time. And to be candid, I don't think big tech companies necessarily have the best track record historically of nailing something on the first try. And so I'm really glad that, we're taking a more focused, measured approach there. Things aren't coming to market as quickly.
I mean, that makes total sense to me. And apart from that, like, do you have any other like use case which people can really benefit from with the help of wearables that you can think of?
Yeah, to me, the phrase I've been saying all the time is, uh, no FOMO, all JOMO, right? FOMO is the fear of missing out, JOMO is that joy of missing out. And I think what wearables really exceed is that you can be connected, you can receive text messaging and calling and notifications, but it helps dynamically filter out that stuff that just isn't as important and can really help you be more present. We released a feature on the watch as well called notification cooldown. And the whole premise is that if you're getting multiple notifications in a row, let's say you have a very active group chat, notification cooldown will automatically silence those additional notifications from that group chat and silence them for about a 2-minute period. And so that's a very small, simple feature, but it chips away at this bigger problem of you want to stay connected, but you don't want that connection to take you out of being present and living your daily life. I think wearables will only continue to build more experiences that try to really filter and curate what gets brought to your attention so that if your wrist is buzzing or you see some overlay on your glasses, it's because it's really important that you see it. And if you're not, you can safely assume that it's not something as important or doesn't need your immediate attention.
So how does it know what is important and what is not important?
So this goes back to what we talked about earlier about how the power of language models are their ability to use language flexibly and also apply common sense. So if you get a notification from your car app on your phone and it says, hey, your car is getting broken into right now, most language models you present that to will be able to dynamically say, yeah, like that's probably a very urgent notification to show the user. They've never been shown that notification before in their data set and their training, but they're able to understand contextually that this is something you might want to show. And similarly, they can do that with less important notifications. As we build out the capacity of these on device models and we get them more efficient, more precise, smaller, and also more contextual using your user behavior, I think it's going to naturally get to a point where instead of needing to go in yourself and configure all these settings and modify and change everything exactly how you need it, it'll be able to very intuitively understand when something is important to you versus not important to you.
See, my biggest question on that is that around data and privacy. For example, Pixel Watch is tracking on your heart
Mhm.
health or something. It's kind of being
Yeah.
paid to a third party, or like it's not like private enough because it's already shared to an LLM. So how
Mhm.
do you kind of tackle that?
So I think that is why something like on device is so important because it can ensure some degree of privacy and user discretion, right? You can always in cloud tell users we're not going to share this information with advertisers or we're not going to use it for XYZ purposes. But that requires a substantial amount of trust, right? You as a user have to trust that company to follow their policy. And I think users should be skeptical. They should exercise skepticism about how information is going to be used by companies, regardless if it's a big tech company or a smaller company. Part of what on device helps ensure is that you don't have to necessarily take that next step to just trust this company at their word. You can go verify that yourself. In fact, we on Android have this infrastructure called Private Compute Core, PCC. And what PCC is an open source, publicly verifiable sandbox for certain sensitive applications. And so, if for some reason we have an application where knowing your heart rate makes sense, that data can live in PCC and you can run compute and inference in it. But critical to PCC is that it can't be sent to the cloud. Anything in that PCC sandbox can't have the internet permission given to it by default. And so you still have control over how that information is used and sent and where it goes. And it's publicly verifiable. Security experts can go look at the code base in Android and verify that PCC does what it says it does, because you can actually see the code and how it's supposed to perform. That, as an on device principle, is something that you can really only do if you put that experience, if you make sure that experience isn't cloud enabled, right? And you can make certain guarantees that are verifiable by security and privacy experts for the safe usage of that AI.
No, I think that makes total sense. And I mean, historically, Google has a really good track record of, keeping people's
Mm.
data private, except when you guys had the SEOs. In the SEO market, you have like a lot of data, which is kind of like, you have
Yeah.
the Google keywords and everything. But again, that's not part of what we
Yeah,
do.
I mean, I think a good example of something that's happened publicly is that during the last announcement of the iPhone in 24, they introduced this ability to use ChatGPT to process certain messages, and they had this secure private cloud infrastructure where it was going to be sent to the cloud and it was going to run on a special instance that would never be stored on a data server or anything like that, and it would be sent back to your phone. And technically, it would be as if it was processed on the device. But I think we saw from consumers that, hey, I that is not a promise that gives me peace of mind, right? I have to trust that you are doing what you're saying you're doing on the server. There isn't, and there was a lot of outrage behind that from their user base. I think what that tells to me is that on device is really important because it's the only way that the common person can really understand this idea of privacy, right? Like, you don't have to show this incredibly complex, back end server structure and how it's going to process the right way if you can just show a user that it's going to stay on your device and it doesn't leave. Now, I'll say personally, I don't. My understanding is that Apple's approach there was like appropriate and preserved privacy and security. I'm speaking purely to the public reaction that was had to that announcement and what that seems to apply about the importance of on
Oh
device.
yeah, I mean, it's gonna get even more and more important that we take measures right now uh, to kind of
Absolutely.
make sure that the privacy is at the top priority. I do want to change the subject and actually talk about in general or broadly, now that you have seen the growth in the wearables and specifically the Pixel Watch,
Mhm.
if you kind of like zoom out and talk about wearables, like including not just watches, maybe glasses and ambient devices,
Yeah.
how do you see these wearables like transforming our interface with AI and the daily life in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah. So I think the most important thing I want to call out is that I really don't see any of these wearables as replacements to the smartphone. In the same way that the smartphone did not replace laptops or desktop PCs, right? At the end of the day, there are some tasks that a smartphone does really, really well. And there's no touching it coming from a laptop. But there's some tasks that a laptop is still fundamentally best at, even if a smartwatch, or even if a phone could do it, right? So, like, you could edit a presentation on your smartphone in theory, but do you really want to do that, right? Is the laptop the better surface for that? Similarly, you probably could draft and send an email from your smartwatch, but do you really want to do that? Is the phone the best place to do that? Instead, what I really try to think about are what are the subset of tasks that a wearable can do similar to a phone or another device, but the wearable does it better because of the interaction affordance, or it's faster or it's quicker. And to me, I think about communications, texting, calling, screening information, triaging and figuring out what's important to do, what's not important to do, navigation, um, like being able to hop on the subway and tap your watch against the terminal to make a payment for something. Those are the sort of things that are really magnetic and click for me. It's not about, hey, here's how we build the device that completely replaces the phone. It's, hey, how do you build a device that's really good at a set of use cases that the phone does today, but maybe not as good as another device? And so let's really create something that's spiky and unique to that wearable.
See, this is something I might not agree with you because if you think about it, uh,
Yeah.
you have the smartphone, right? I mean, and then
Mhm.
most of the things you can do on smartphone, you can do with the help of your smartwatch augmented with your AR glasses. That means if you combine these
Sure.
two technologies or two or three technologies,
Mhm.
then you can kind of replace the smartphone. Because I think the smartphone is almost like a step towards the transformation, which is not a final step. And I think the
Mhm.
smartphone people are realizing, as we have discussed earlier, that it's not the best of the technology that we have created. So I think if you
Yeah.
combine these two, three technologies like smartwatches and AR glasses, then you have a chance wherein you don't need smartphone as much.
I think that's fair. I think the difference is, does that reduce usage or does it eliminate usage entirely? As a counterpoint, laptops have been around for two-ish decades now. They have not replaced the desktop computer. Tons of people still have desktop computers. In fact, tons of people have both laptop and desktop computers, despite 98% of people probably being able to get off just fine with using a laptop and plugging it into a monitor. I think what's true though is that there are some form factors that are better at certain tasks for others, and that differentiation is still meaningful.
Mm.
Even if, glasses and watch together start to become really proficient and can do a lot of the tasks a phone can, I don't think that'll ever mean the phone goes away, because there still might be certain benefits and enduring qualities of the smartphone that we can't fully see right now because we're so early in this space, right? It's not clear to us what is the like enduring quality of the phone versus this hypothetical future 5, 10 years from now.
See, I think now it makes sense what you're saying, and
Yeah.
it gave me like a new perspective. So if you think about it, a smartphone can still act as a central intelligence. And what I mean by
Yep.
that is that you have your AirPods connected to your smartphone. You can
Mhm.
have your smartwatch connected to your smartphone, as well as you can have the
Yeah.
AR glasses and even Aura Ring and everything
Mhm.
connected to the smartphone. So that means your smartphone can still be the central intelligence which kind of communicates to these devices, and then these
Yeah.
devices communicates with you. Do you think that that can be a better perspective to it, or you still think?
Yeah. I think there's a real question about what does the phone become,
Yeah.
right? Um, and I think it's a really good question to ask, because I think there's a world where you say, hey, if the phone isn't the best interface to do these tasks anymore, does the phone become less of, a giant screen that you interact with and more so a source of compute,
Mm.
or a source of power or inference, or something that is not so constrained by glasses and watch because the phone is dramatically larger than it. um, by that proxy, the main difference between, I think, a desktop and a laptop is that the laptop is portable, the desktop is powerful, right? And so does that scale to the watch and phone? Is the watch and glass portable whereas the phone is powerful, or is there another dynamic there, right? It's really hard to say, right? We can make these analogies, but they're imperfect. And that's because we've never really had these specific set of dynamics before. And the watch and the phone can uniquely do things that a watch can't, and glasses can uniquely do things that a watch can't. Um, and so it's really hard to say, but I think part of what's really exciting is that there are so many futures that are all viable right now.
100%. I think that as you said that, I was thinking the same, that man, we're living in such an interesting time. It's like
Mhm.
the possibilities are endless in the future.
Yeah.
We have the power to kind of take it to the next level and kind of help our future generations and kind of
Mhm.
decide where exactly we want to take this, like to your point, yeah.
Yeah, I think the best analogy I can think of is in the early 2000s, there wasn't consensus yet on what a phone should be. And so you had the BlackBerry and you had the LG Chocolate and you had flip phones and you had all these interesting mechanisms and designs and interfaces. Um, and it was because all of them were valid. Now, granted, Apple came along and basically invented the modern smartphone and consolidated the market dramatically. They found the best solution. But that hasn't happened yet. And it's not clear if there is a best solution yet in the wearable space. And so, what's so exciting about it is there are multiple form factors that are a little weird or a little novel that are all valid and finding traction and finding their footing. And nobody knows if one is going to win out or if we're going to be in this equilibrium or if there's going to be some Apple iPhone moment that happens again that consolidates the market. Um, it's so high potential right now. And I think that potential is intrinsically so exciting.
Yeah. If you were to kind of put your imagination hat and be in like
Yeah.
5 years from now, or maybe like let's say, yeah, 5 to 10 years from now, what do
Mhm.
you think that the world will look like in terms of like wearables, and like how we gonna be, materializing all of
Yeah.
these technologies?
So I think smart glasses are going to become much, much more popular. It feels pretty clear to me, and I've used the Meta Ray Bans quite a bit myself as just a personal consumer. It's a good product, and the word is starting to spread that a lot of people like this sort of form factor and this device, and there's a lot of benefits to it. I think in 5 years, undoubtedly, we will see a higher penetration of glasses. I also think that in 5 years, you see a lot more, I think, complex narratives and bifurcation in this health and fitness tracking market. Right now, a smartwatch up until this point has basically been a glorified health and fitness tracker, right? Like in theory, you buy it for productivity, but really you buy it to track your sleep and calories and exercises. And people don't really send text messages or take calls from it the same way that they would expect to. I think that value proposition is going to shift pretty dramatically where you start to see people using their smartwatch more and more like a productivity tool. More and more, I think you'll see people say, actually, I'm going to go out to get coffee with a friend and I'm not going to bring my phone. All I need is my watch because I have my credit card on it and I can send text messages and I can look up Gmail and I can use Google Maps. Like that is sufficient for this 30-minute, 1 hour use case, two
By the
hours,
way,
3 hour use case.
by the way, to your point, I mean, people are still doing that right now. It's just that we
Yes,
don't have that much capabilities or communication.
exactly. And I think that's because today, in order to do that experience, you have to compromise so much, right? There is no, prior to smart replies, there was no really good way to send a text message back to someone without using speech to text. Now you can legitimately send text replies to someone in a way that aren't super weird. And that is a new affordance that wasn't available before. Slowly and slowly, we're chipping away at the issues people have with just using a watch. And I think in 5 years' time, we won't get there where, hey, using your watch for a day is just like using the phone. But I think there will be enough use cases where more and more people will feel comfortable making that choice. And so I see a world where there's much more abundance in terms of the device that someone has on them. Glasses, watch, people will still have phones. I don't think that's going anywhere. But I think the concentration of people who have their phone on them at that very moment is going to go down quite a bit, or at very minimum, change to an operating model where the phone isn't in your pocket, it's somewhere in your bag, right? Because you just don't need to reach for it as often as you used to.
See, that's a central intelligence, right? And that can live anywhere.
Yeah,
Um, I still think that if you think about it, like if I imagine it 5 years from now, people will be like, I don't want to carry my AR glasses, my smartwatch. I mean, smartwatch is still
for
okay
sure.
because you have it, but then you don't want to carry something which you have to have an extra thing in your pocket.
Yeah, for
You see what
sure.
I'm trying to say? And so, to your point, that these form factors are going to be more and more important because you don't have to think about those like
Mhm.
consciously. Oh, I forgot my phone in my car or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think you feel so. Right now, so much of our world has to conform around what the smartphone is because it's just such an important critical technology. But you know, the phone doesn't always fit in pants the right way, or like there is not no right way to carry it. I think a really good example is that The Galaxy Flip, that clamshell device that Samsung has built, is really, really popular, particularly among women, because that smaller form factor works really nicely with their accessories and the clothing that they have. I think it goes to show that how much of a problem form factor really is at the end of the day in terms of determining the right solution and the right product for someone. And
Yeah.
so when I see the success of the flip, I don't necessarily think like, wow, that's the end stage product. I think someone is so desperate for a solution to this limitation of form factor that they're willing to take a device that honestly makes quite a few compromises just to be thinner and smaller. And I think that's a unique market opportunity that, if you take it to the logical conclusion, opens doors to other form factors or other devices.
Yeah, yeah. I might be asking you this weird question, but I have to get the itch out of my head. Uh,
Please.
you said you have different form factors. Can you consider like our fashion, like clothing, as a form factor, and can
Yeah.
that be a sort of like a digital wearable in a way? Or I don't know, I'm just throwing out some random idea
It's
here.
it's such an it's such an interesting idea. I think we're really far away from that because part of what is so critical about fabric is its flexibility. And we're just nowhere close to having an SoC or a chip that can so easily be folded and bent and washed and, be exposed to water the way that, I think fabric you expect it to. Um, I think there was a really big surge of electric and digital clothing in the early 2000s, like late 2000s, early 2010s, because it was so new. I do think we could come back around to that eventually, but I think similar to why on device, my question is why this form factor, right? Why
Hmm.
does it need to be a shirt, right? Why does it need to be a pair of pants? What is that doing that can't be done otherwise? And I think there's probably a lot of good justification there, but there's so many compromises you need to make. I think it's just there's just so few users today willing to make those many compromises for the functionality.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. Ultimately, it comes down to like what's the use case and what is the feasibility of what you're trying to build, and
Yeah,
how
exactly.
much value is it able to provide, right?
Yeah. And so maybe a decade from now, we have a really serious conversation about embedded clothing and AI wearables as this next frontier there. But at least from my point of view, we're not at that point yet.
Yeah, for sure. Um, Austin, I wanted to ask you, I know that you have to go, but what excites you the most right now, given what you have learned so far, in this industry?
I think that there's still so much change that can happen, you know? Um, there's been so much focus in the past 2 or 3 years about this current AI momentum and how much evolution there's been. And while I think we've started to see some of the frontier capabilities at the large end really stagnate, there's so much untapped potential in that smallest end, like the frontier ultra, Gemini Ultra, ChatGPT 5 Pros, right? Those are starting to stagnate a little more in terms of what is available to bring to users. But there's so much untouched possibility on that smallest end, sub 500 million parameters. And there's no shortage of papers that I read and I keep coming across that imply all these really amazing, simple and ingenious ways of optimizing, improving training performance, improving quality, improving latency. I really do think that there's a whole unexplored world that happens at that smallest end. And with the emergence of glasses as a new form factor and really these new wearables, I think we're only going to see more and more investment in that space, and we're going to see things open up in a really interesting way.
Beautifully said. Um, I have a last question for you.
Please.
I think your journey, the way you have described, seems very inspiring. And then, you have not like your resilience seems very powerful because you have started from something which you didn't know anything about, where
Mhm.
people would have been in their comfort zone, and you kind of went out
Yeah.
of your comfort zone to kind of be in an industry, and you had a vision of what you saw in the future, and now you are kind of working towards it. So if you were to kind of take a step back, and if you were to be young, or if you were to kind of start everything
Mhm.
again, knowing everything that you know, what advice would you give a young generation or people who want to switch their careers, people who want to start off in this AI and wearable industry? What advice would you give them right now so that their next 5 years and 10 years are set?
I think if you're working in technology, if you want to be in a tech space, you have to understand the fundamentals of what you're working with. To me, it's like being a librarian, but not knowing how to read. And I'm sure you could be a really effective librarian not knowing how to read, but you miss so much nuance, context, discussion, granularity, and insight by lacking that basic understanding of legibility and feasibility. If you want to be serious in working with these technologies, you have to be willing to roll your sleeves up and learn. I will be the first to say that I'm not the best coder, right? I did software engineering for a bit. I'm now a product manager, and I do not know how to code the experiences I'm working on, but I conceptually understand them, right? I can talk about the trade offs of thermal performance and tokens per second, and I know what feels feasible and infeasible. If I'm having a discussion with an engineer and a designer, I usually have a pretty good understanding of like what the engineering perspective is and what would be in the realm of feasibility and not. And I think that's because I've built a really fundamental understanding. Um, of what this technology is and what it's capable and where the trajectory is. I will be the first to say, and I'm very proud of it. I think I'm probably one of the most research forward product managers working in AI. I read papers constantly. I am part of like multiple reading groups. I try to stay really contemporary. And I think you have to be willing to submit yourself to that. Along that thread, I think you have to be willing to be stupid. You have to be willing to accept that you will be the least intelligent person in that room when it comes to a topic and not let that intimidate or stop you. You can't let asking a stupid question keep you from learning, right? You can't let your pride or that sense of like, hey, like I need to maintain a certain appearance or, I don't want to ask something that might be intuitive to others stop you. Of course, don't commandeer an entire meeting so you can ask what LLM stands for, but you should be really like ceaseless in terms of your desire to learn and um, take any opportunity that you don't understand something as a signal to understand it and really drive and push yourself to learn that until you're not the stupidest person in the room. Fortunately, I'm really grateful to have an opportunity that I think I am the stupidest person on my team, right? All the engineers I work with are much smarter than me and know what they're doing, but I get to learn so much from them. And so I might be the stupidest engineer among them, but I'm definitely the smartest product manager when I go back to the other leads.
I think you're being humble. I think the fact is that you have built a team from scratch to now more than 30. So that says a lot about you as a manager, as well as the
Hmm.
research work that you have done, and the work that you have put in.
I think you have to ask yourself at the end of the day, when faced with something that you don't know, that is daunting and difficult for you to wrap your mind around and paralyzing or potentially upends everything that you assume to be true, does that stop you from moving forward? Or are you able to move forward regardless, even though it's uncomfortable, even though it's scary, even though you don't know what you're doing? I think if you can do the latter, then nothing can stop you because I think so many people today will take ambiguity as a stop sign when ambiguity should be like an invitation to create clarity so that other people can benefit from it as well. And in that process, you learn.
Yeah, such an amazing point, Austin. This has been a pleasure. I've learned so much about wearables technology and where the industry is heading towards. Thanks a lot for being on the show and providing so much value to me and to the audience.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I really enjoyed this conversation and I look forward to many in the future.
With that, I'm going to say thanks a lot, audience, for joining the show. I hope you guys gained a lot of wisdom and experience from Austin. If you guys have learned something that you want to share, Feel free to leave in the comment section. And if you want somebody that you want me to invite, let me know. And as always, take care. Ciao.